What even is this timeline? Hello Swolemates, welcome back, and dog bless you. If you had asked me 2 years ago whether or not I thought I'd ever have to make a video like this, I'd have assumed you were joking. But the Euro West is a joke, so here we are. We are going to talk about Trump's weird fixation on Canada because, as I have stated many times on this channel, I am Canadian. And also Bahamian. Point is, I am not from the USA, nor do I have any desire to be from the USA. And this is an assumption I run into a lot, either that I am American or I want to be. And initially I thought this whole self-important Murica thinking was how Trump manipulated so many people into supporting him, but I think at this point that even he believes it himself, at least to an extent. So let's talk about that, the way President-elect Donald Trump has fixed his sights on territorial expansion. My attention got looped into this initially by one of the cringy AI images that he likes to hack up on his social media. More specifically, this one, of him standing next to the Canadian flag while overlooking Switzerland, because that's the Matterhorn. But he probably should have specified Canadian Rockies or something while he was goblin moding over his keyboard entering prompts into whatever AI slot machine he uses. But that would require some bare bones basic knowledge of geography. It is important to state first and foremost that Donald Trump is a bully. He relies on conflict to be relevant and feel powerful, and this is just more of the same. But I can understand fear in response to this because this anthropomorphic hemorrhoid has a tendency to use that good old creeper method of haha JK, unless. We'll get to it, moving on. Just the framing of Canada as the 51st state is so embarrassingly thoughtless. Like you're just gonna have a state that's bigger than the rest of the country combined? You really think that in the United States, a country whose motto might as well be biggest rock is best rock, you think that people with decision-making capacity in that country are going to allow for something like that? Like, how are you going to explain that to Texas? But let's get a little more real for a second. Is Trump going to annex Canada? Frankly, I have no idea. I didn't think that a convicted felon and insurrectionist who has been found liable for sexual assault could ever rise to the level of influence that he has achieved, and yet here we are. Apparently any torturous fever dream is possible. I do know a few things worth noting though, some of which might bring you comfort. Or disappointment if you are a lost Trumper who somehow stumbled upon my channel. To start, an undertaking of this magnitude would require a lot of organization and cooperation, something that Trump's cabinet is notoriously bad at, and he's not even sworn into office yet. The girls are fighting. Secondly, the negotiations alone would take more time than this cheese-powdered meat sack has to work with, I'm just saying. I mean, in his presidential term, just to be clear. But what am I basing that on? Well, since the leader-elect of the whole-ass USA doesn't understand the basic political structure of his greatest trade partner, let's go ahead and run through that. The United States is a federal republic, whereas Canada is a constitutional monarchy. To avoid getting caught in the weeds here, this basically means that annexing Canada is not simply a matter of plonking the US president in the prime minister's seat. Rather, the matter would have to be taken up with the British Crown. Let's pretend for a second that Trump actually has more charm and political aptitude than a beached sea slug. He would have to do a hell of a lot of negotiating to even entertain the idea, let alone follow through with it. More likely, because of who he is as a person, Trump would attempt to back Canada into a corner with an economic war rather than absorb the country through diplomatic negotiation. Even in this case, the process would be very much the same. After taking it up with Chuck, the decision would move to Canada's House of Commons, Senate, and provincial leaders. Canada is made up of 3 territories, Yukon, Nunavut, and the Northwest Territories, and 10 provinces: British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Provinces and territories are constitutionally different, but for the sake of simplicity here, what you need to know is that they have distinct governments and are subject to federal oversight. Voters under the Canadian government participate in elections at both the provincial or territorial and federal levels, and the structure is similar for both. Each riding is represented by different party candidates who voters choose from. The party who wins the most seats has that leader assume position as either the premier or the prime minister in provincial or federal elections, respectively. In this completely hypothetical nightmare scenario, each province or territory would likely become a state under the US federal government. This would mean dissolving the Canadian federal government, and as much as Bitcoin Millhouse is himself a hate-peddling nationalist, but he didn't throw all in as a career politician who cosplays as a working-class laborer only to bend the knee to zesty cheese Hitler. He still desperately wants to be the prime minister. And even if this did somehow happen, every single province would have to agree to it, and there are 3 very important reasons why that would just never take place. Quebec, Quebec, and Quebec. In all seriousness, like if we're pretending that maybe there was a snowball's chance in hell of this happening, Alberta and Saskatchewan would probably be the only provinces that might entertain the idea a little bit. But even they would be unlikely to go for it. Even in our most conservative provinces, Trump is not a very popular guy. And Canadians like being Canadian. And it's really important to stress here that this is only looking at the Canadian government. The nation of Canada exists on Turtle Island, which has historically been and continues to be under the stewardship of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. They are well versed in resisting colonial takeover and present an even more dedicated and resilient force than Quebec. Now, all of this assumes that Trump, a fatal safeguard glitch in a war machine, wouldn't just try to take Canada by military means. But he would run into some problems here as well, some pretty significant ones, because I know it may be hard to believe, but not every single person who surrounds Trump is a tyrannical megalomaniac. At least, not to the extent that he is. There are people in his inner circle who at least understand how foolish this would be, because at the end of the day, they're in it for money, not glory. The US declaring war on Canada, its closest ally, would be declaring war on the rest of NATO. Needless to say, this would be devastating for all of the USA's other military and trade alliances. It also wouldn't accomplish the economic and egonomic goals that motivate Trump. He wants to be the biggest, richest, most powerful boy, but he also wants to be a beloved hero of the people, and declaring war on Canada would make him an even bigger pariah on the global stage than he already is. Unfortunately for him, other global powers have not defunded their education systems to the point of creating a population of struggling and therefore easily manipulated people who believe his lies out of desperation. And this is not a shot at them. That was by design. They might be destructive victims in this, but they are victims of a rigged system all the same. Part of Trump's fixation here is that he loves the word tariff because it sounds like he's doing something big and important. But he has since learned that tariffs are bad, actually, and would only hurt the US, particularly given how much it relies on Canadian resources. He's trying to imply that he'll just take what his own tariffs would inhibit the acquisition of, because he'd rather flush the US economy down the shitter than admit that he was wrong and has no idea what he's talking about. So is Trump going to annex Canada? I mean, that would require intelligence, organization, firm alliances, an understanding of consent, and other things that Trump is just not very good at, if he's ever even attempted them at all. So probably not. But it's important for us to respond all the same, because like I said, in addition to being a blustering, entitled embarrassment to the human race, Trump is a bully. He's used to people not calling him on his shit because he's so loud and lacking in self-awareness, it creates a fucking force field around him that no reason can penetrate. I spoke recently about the importance of compassion for people and anger for systems, with a few exceptions, and this would be one of them, because Trump is the system personified. He will continue to stomp and scream his way to getting whatever he wants if we don't tell him to eat a buffet of dicks. So if he wants a chirp off, then by all means, Canadians will respond. In fact, I will go ahead and start us off. Fuck you, Donald. You look like the dried out sweet potato in my pantry if it had a worse skincare routine. Fuck you, Donald. The last time you had a solid bowel movement, Jimmy Carter was teaching jazzercise. Fuck you, Donald. You filed for bankruptcy so many times, your insolvency trustee is seeking a restraining order. Fuck you, Donald. Hooters called. It wants compensation for unlicensed use of its color palette. Fuck you, Donald. Your VP thought that the OnlyFans logo stood for Only Flipper and signed up so fast he crashed the server. Fuck you, Donald. I would suggest switching to the metric system if you want to exaggerate those inches, but based on your recaps of your rallies, I think the problem is that you just can't count. While I have my problems with the colonial state of Canada, I was pleased to see how many of its leaders stood up and said something in response to this guy while I was in the process of writing this video. And I want to end by emphasizing two things. Once again, it is important to call bullies on their shit, because guys like this are driven by entitlement and nothing else. They just keep pushing until they get what they want. We need to stand up to them. We need to not only say no, but also shut up and fuck off. And secondly, since the US is a republic, it would actually be more constitutionally feasible for them to join us. So, blue states, hit us up.